What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back with another amazing Auctions of the Week recap. So much to go over, folks. It is so overwhelming trying to assemble these recaps. There's just so many auctions on so many different platforms, so I'm so glad that you have joined me today. Tons of insane, both vintage and modern sales, and we'll also be going over these new prototype Pokemon cards you've been hearing about, these alpha, beta, delta cards that have been recently graded by CGC towards the end of this recap. Folks, today's recap is brought to you by the great people over at CantoShark.com. On CantoShark.com, they have a tremendous variety of graded cards from PSA, Beckett, CGC, consisting of both vintage and modern, English, Japanese, with a wide variety of grades available as well. With worldwide shipping and payment plans available for anything over $500, I encourage you, that's right, you, to go check out CantoShark.com. I will have the link to their website in the description of this video, so please, after the recap, go to CantoShark.com and check out what they have available for you. Alright folks, let's get started off with the hottest set of 2024, in my opinion, would have to be the Scarlet and Violet 151 set. Here we have a PSA 10 Zapdos EX Special Illustration Rare that sold this week for $202.50, and then again as a CGC 10 Pristine for $401. So it seems to me, specifically for this set, the CGC 10 Pristines are going for like double the amount than a PSA 10 is going for a lot of these graded cards. I don't know why, but we saw last week with that Venusaur EX that was certainly the case. They actually went for a lot more than double a PSA 10. Here is an Alakazam EX Special Illustration Rare that sold for $207. Here is a Wartortle that sold for $260. And then of course the Charizard EX selling for huge numbers this week. One sold for an even $700. Another one sold for $775 as a PSA 10. And then here's that trio I mentioned last week that was still in auction. The Venusaur, the Charizard, and the Blastoise Special Illustration Rares sold for a grand total of $1,450, nearly $500 per card. That is absolutely insane. A couple of very notable sales from the Paldean Fates set. Here is a Mew EX that sold for $410, and then again for $425. And then here we have the Charizard that sold for $297. It's not often that Charizard takes second place in a set, but it certainly has stepped aside for this Bubble Mew, if you will. I think it's been called dubbed the Bubble Mew. So hopefully that bubble don't pop too hard. Here we have a CGC 10 Pristine Moonbryon VMAX from Evolving Skies. This card in a PSA 10 has been selling for around $1,300 to $1,400. This week, a CGC 10 copy sold for $1,750. And then here is a card that, this is the greatest alt art card of all time, I think, in terms of value. It is the Latios GX from Team Up. His card in a PSA 9. A PSA 9, folks, sold for $1,075. Now tell me, what modern card do you know of that sells for over $1,000 as a PSA 9? And then a PSA 10 sold for $2,600. And it's also worth noting that a BGS 10 Pristine copy sold for $2,700. So, I mean, normally the BGS 10s sell for a good amount above the PSA 10s, but they were pretty close in value for this particular card. Here is a Gengar VMAX from Fusion Strike. The best card from that set sold as a BGS 10 Black Label recently for $7,900. Now on to a couple of cards, specifically full art trainer cards that have not aged well. Here we have a PSA 10 Japanese Sightseer card from the Tag Team GX All-Star set. This card sold this week for $900, while about a year and a half ago this card was super valuable, selling at about $1,825, with some sales even higher than that. So this card has effectively been cut in half in terms of value over the past year or two. And then we have this limited Master Battle set Alola Friends Full Art Trainer card that sold for $2,225 as a PSA 10. And folks, this card had some astronomical sales at one point, selling for over $16,000. It was so hyped up, it was unbelievable. Now down to about $2,225. So yeah, that Full Art Trainer bubble certainly did burst over the past year or two. And then a couple of, let's say, auction bloopers I wanted to run by you. Here is a CGC 10 pristine Charizard. Do you see anything wrong with this picture here? I don't know, something a little bit off with this here graded copy. I think the quality assurance guy over at CGC might have had the day off when they graded this card, but still sold for $73.89. Here we have what's clearly a 2016 Japanese first edition Charizard. Clearly, right?
What? No.
That sold for $851. So yeah, nothing wrong with that listing. They're spot on. And then here we have a Sandslash first edition foil bleed holo error rare 1 of 1 bootleg copy from way back when. They were trying to get $15,000 for it, but nobody bid. What? Come on, people, 1 of 1. This card is so rare. It says right there in the title, 1 of 1. And nobody bid on it. On to some vintage cards from this week's auction. We have the CGC 10 Pristine Latios EX from EX Dragon, sold for $1,176, while the Latios EX sold for $1,414. And then here we have a Gengar EX from Fire Red Leaf Green that sold for $1,161, and a CGC 10 Pristine Arcanine EX that sold for $1,625. And then here is an absolutely beautiful Mew Holo from EX Holon Phantoms as a CGC 10 Pristine that sold for $2,025. Here we have a CGC 10 Shining Gyarados. This is the unlimited copy that sold for $4,550, while a PSA 10 first edition Magikarp, or first edition Shining Magikarp, sold for $3,175, while a PSA 10 first edition Shining Gyarados sold for $7,548. Here we have a CGC 10 Pristine Crystal Ho-Oh from Skyridge that sold for $5,783. And then here is a CGC 10 Gem Mint Crystal Charizard from Skyridge that sold for $9,100. And then here is a PSA 10 first edition Korean base set Venusaur that sold for $1,875. And these Korean variant cards from base set, particularly in PSA 10, are pretty tough to come by. Here is an unlimited Snorlax holo from Jungle Set in PSA 10 that sold for $2,730. And then to finish off the sales on eBay, here is a lot of 28 reverse holo cards from Legendary Collection. You got Charmander there, you got some Legendary Birds, you got some Evolutions. This sold for a grand total of $4,250. On to the PWCC weekly auction recap. Here is a Level X Dialga from the Great Encounters set that sold for $1,710, along with this Infernape Level X that sold for $1,080. And I still believe that Level X cards, particularly as 10s, are a very underrated asset. They are always such low pop cards. I don't know, I've always been a fan of Level X cards. Here is a CGC 10 Pristine Pichu holo from Expedition that sold for $1,290. This is a Pop 2 card in the CGC 10 Pristine Pop Report. And then here is a CGC 9.5 Black Star Promo Venusaur holo that sold for $810. And folks, this card is so tough to grade. It is so tough to get a 10 in any grading card company that a couple weeks ago, actually last month, this card sold as a PSA 10 for almost $20,000. $19,200 to be exact, because the PSA 10 pop is so low. Yeah, the Venusaurs are always scratched in the holo area. Super tough card to get as a 10. Here is a PSA 10 Misaki Gengar promo card that sold for $10,800. Here is a GX Battle Boost Full Art Lily as a CGC 10 Pristine that sold for $8,700. And then here we have a XY promo lottery Ash Greninja EX in PSA 10 that sold for $18,600. And then here are a couple of PSA 10 Crystal Charizards. Here's one that sold for $16,200. Another one sold for $16,800. And then I wanted to go over a couple of notable sales from the auction platform Alt, a platform we haven't really covered in the past. Here is a CGC 10 Gem Mint 25th Anniversary Creatures Deck Corporate History Charizard, sold for $21,600. And then folks, I'm not sure how interested you are in these because I'm kind of on the fence about how interested I am, but they are these new playtest cards. Well, they're not new, but they're these alpha, beta, delta playtest cards that are have been graded by CGC, hitting some pretty phenomenal prices. Now, a majority of these are pending payment, or payment was just initiated, so they might not be paid for. These are brand new sales, but I wanted to run by some of the numbers. Here's the CGC 10 Delta Squirtle card that sold for $7,500. Here is a CGC 8.5 Delta Charmander that sold for $8,700. Here is a CGC 9.5 Beta Playtest Snorlax card that sold for $10,128. Here is a CGC 9 Alpha Prototype Kadabra that sold for $10,500. Here's a CGC 8 Alpha Presentation Pikachu card that sold for an even $15,000. Here's a CGC 9.5 Pikachu Beta Playtest card that sold for $15,600. Here's a CGC 9 Alpha Playtest Pikachu card that sold for $16,800. Here we have a CGC 9.5 Alpha Prototype Pikachu card that sold for $58,560. Here's a CGC 9 Delta Playtest Venusaur that sold for $11,100. Here is a Beta Playtest CGC 10 Chansey that sold for $10,849, while this CGC 10 Alpha Prototype Bulbasaur sold for $13,368. Here we have the CGC 9 Mew Beta Playtest card that sold for $12,000, while the CGC 10 Mewtwo sold for $11,100. And then here is a CGC 10 Delta Playtest Prototype Blastoise, sold for $49,688. And then to finish off these prototype cards, here is a Delta Playtest Charizard that graded a CGC 10 and sold for $99,000. Now, like I said, folks, these are all pending amounts. A lot of them might not be paid for. I don't know. These are all brand new to the market cards. So let me know what you think of these Alpha, Beta, Delta playtest cards. Just let me know in the comments below, because I'm not sure what to think of them. I know the community's kind of divided on where they came from and just their significance in this hobby. To finish off this recap, let's go over a couple of major sales from the PWCC, or should I say Fanatics Collect Premier Auction. Here is a 2002 Japanese Spring Battle Road number 3 trainer card that graded a PSA 10 and sold for $31,200. And then here is a PSA 10 Tropical Mega Battle Lucky Stadium promo card in PSA 10 that sold for $30,000. Here we have a lot of 102 first edition base set cards graded by CGC. They have varying grades. That sold for a grand total of $34,200. I know a lot of the commons and uncommons were mostly 10s and 9.5s. But yeah, $34,200 for the entire set. Here we have a CGC 8 Super Secret Battle Best in Japan number 3 trainer card that sold for $39,600. Here is a 2002 Spring Battle Road number 1 trainer card as a PSA 10 that sold for $46,800, while this number 2 trainer card, which has a lower pop as a PSA 10, sold for $50,400. Which brings me to the final auction. It is a lot of 8 of these Japanese Alpha prototype cards. You got, looks like a Pikachu there, Bulbasaur, and 6 others, all graded with CGC, sold for a grand total of $132,000. So folks, what do you think of these new prototype cards hitting the market, selling for pretty astronomical prices? Is it your cup of tea? Let me know in the comments below. That's all I got for you today, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in my next one.